Hello, everyone. Now, I know that it's hard to keep up on top of what's going on in the Holy Land, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Israel, I'm Aaron Porras, and this is the Weekly Review. Speaking of progress, Israel starting its latest COVID-19 vaccination campaign for children aged 12 to 15. Thousands of the 600,000 plus or so eligible kids already signed up. And this meant to ensure that Israel's herd immunity against the pandemic holds strong for as long as possible. According to the plan, children in the eligible age group who are either at risk for serious COVID infection themselves or who live with someone at risk for serious illness will be first to receive their shots. Likewise, families expecting to travel abroad in the near future will be able to sign up for the first round. And finally, so far, no significant side effects from the shots have been observed in individuals under 16, some of whom have already been vaccinated by Israeli HMOs in the months leading up to the broader nationwide campaign. Finally, saving arguably the best news for last, the Israeli Ramat Gan Safari welcoming its newest member of the pack, or should I say the crash. 11-year-old rhino Rihanna giving birth to her third baby on Sunday, the 33rd rhino to be born at the Israeli zoo, and the baby boy seen trotting alongside his proud mama in good health, the pair having been separated into a designated maternity zone for the next several weeks, or until the baby is strong enough to join the rest of the crew.
Today, you can see behind me Rihanna. She gave birth to a young male, which we still don't have a name for, but we're very excited. This species, the southern white rhinoceros, is endangered. It's near threatened. That's the specific risk level. But we're part of a very exciting group of breeding rhinos. This is our 33rd rhino that we're giving to nature.
The Ramat Gan Safari, housing the Middle East's largest collection of wild animals, including lions, hippos, and elephants. And for obvious reasons, it's considered to be the world leader in rhino breeding. A terrifying scene outside a Jerusalem hospital Monday, a massive sinkhole appearing without warning.
עם קבלת הדיווח זרמו לפה כוחות משטרה רבים וכן כוחות החירום וההצלה. ביצענו סריקות, פעולות ראשוניות להצלת חיים. תיחמנו את האזור, בודדנו אותו, התחלנו בהורדת אנשים לסרוק בפנים, סריקת מצלמות לאתר שאין אנשים בחניון שקרסו לתוך החניון, שאין נפגעים.
8 fire and rescue crews rushing to the scene after a huge void in the earth opening in an instant Monday afternoon. The massive sinkhole swallowing several cars. And the jarring incident recorded in the parking lot of the Shaarei Tzedek Medical Center in the heart of Jerusalem. Thankfully, no injuries have yet been reported. Still, with concerns of another collapse, the area and building cordoned off now as a danger zone. Additionally, traffic nearby rerouted and blocked off. As for the cause, a tunnel under construction running under the hospital and parking lot believed to be related. The hole also seems to have appeared in the older section of the now expanded lot. An investigation is still underway. In other news, as nuclear negotiations between Iran and world powers ongoing in Vienna, the UN's atomic energy watchdog and U.S. officials seemingly beginning to express public doubts that there's any way to get Iran back towards compliance. United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken testifying that it's unclear if Iran is willing and prepared to come back into compliance with the JCPOA, as it's simultaneously in talks while galloping forwards with its nuclear program towards a weaponized breakout time of just a few weeks. And this a stark shift from just last week when EU and U.S. officials both expressed confidence that a deal could be struck as soon as this week. Likewise, IAEA heads concerned over Tehran's refusal to answer questions about uranium recently found in undeclared sites.
After many months, Iran has not provided the necessary explanation, and I'm deeply concerned about this. And I have reiterated to my Iranian colleagues here and to authorities in Tehran the requirement for Iran to clarify and to resolve these issues without further delay. Why? Because the lack of progress in clarifying them seriously affects our ability to provide assurance of the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program.
Research fellow at the International Institute for Counterterrorism at the IDC Herzliya, Dr. Fadi Ismail, joining us now with more. Doctor, thanks so much. This is a frightening report. What do you think is the United States' game plan in response at this point in time?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I think the first thing is to understand where Iran stands. when I try to project myself into the mental state, I realize that for them, reaching a deal right now is really not a priority because they have nothing to gain from a deal like the JCPOA with the U.S. currently. They hold so many cards, and they actually have, from their standpoint, they have already endured the worst that there could be, and that was the Trump years. And those Trump years were very, very harsh on Iran's policy, on Iran's economy, its plans and programs in the Middle East and beyond. And this is why for months before the elections, I really hoped for him to lose. And that happened. Right now, I believe they are under the impression that they hold many more cards than what they had before. The Iranian regime thrives on a situation where they can create blurred lines, where they can create uncertainty that allows them to move sometimes in incremental mode, sometimes in fast moves, in a manner that keeps the other side guessing. Basically, they're trying to do to the Biden administration what they did before to the Obama administration and what Trump did to them during his 4 years. And you have to understand something very basic about the Iranians. They have almost, almost 40 years, actually more than 40 years of experience of being a so-called pariah state. They have a lot of experience and many mechanisms in place to face whatever pressures that the United States can bring upon them economically, politically, militarily, whatever they are. So when I look at their situation right now, when I look at the United States with its internal troubles, and there are many internal troubles right now in America, when I look at the weakening interest of the U.S. in the Middle East for a variety of reasons, when I look at the fact that now American allies in the region are beginning to try and find ways to reconnect with the Iranian regime because they see the weakness of the American position.
So my question though, I'm sorry to interrupt, but with everything that you've been mentioning here, it reminds me how Israel has for years really been advocating for tougher stances on Tehran. Why does it sound like Western and negotiating powers are surprised by Iran's noncompliance and refusals, etc., and where do we go from here?
I think there's a major misunderstanding that is endemic to Western policymaking in the Middle East that has been shown since the 70s, since the way they worked with the Shah, the wars against Iraq, some of the other moves, the very strange moves that the West has done in the Middle East that in the end served to help the Iranian revolution grow to the monster that it is now. There's really a very basic, I think what it is, it's an academic culture or an analytical culture that tries to project onto the Middle East models of thought that simply don't belong in here. It just, I can't think, I mean, I think it's a meta thinking thing, and this is not an academic lecture, of course, but I talk about this a lot in my own speeches and lectures. I think the problem is really a meta thinking issue. The way of thinking about the Middle East is unrealistic. Iran today is in a situation that it does not need to sign an agreement. It does need to negotiate the agreement. It does need to have all this international attention and all the leverages that come with it. But why would they give up the nuclear weapon development? What could possibly be the reason from their standpoint?
All right.
Nobody's going to attack them.
Dr. Fadi Ismail, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Finally, for more reason to be proud, after its cancellation last year, the annual Tel Aviv Pride celebrations, the largest in all the Middle East, officially set for June 25. The parade will also be one of the world's first mass gatherings since the coronavirus pandemic first began its devastation, over 250,000 attendees having been at the last event in 2019. Tel Aviv Mayor Ron Huldai saying that Pride events in Tel Aviv-Yafo are a long-standing tradition centered on a message of equality, acceptance, and human and civil rights. And he adds that Tel Aviv is proud to be a groundbreaking city in its approach to the LGBTQ community. As in most years, the 2021 Tel Aviv Pride is set to include shows, activities and stalls for all ages from around 10 a.m. Then the parade itself, complete with floats, scheduled to depart from Sderot Ben Zion near Habima Square at noon. And by 2 p.m., it'll end at the traditional main stage in Charles Clore Park, which we're seeing here along the coast, where a huge party with DJs and a family and youth complex await. We begin with breaking news of a massive forest fire breaking out Wednesday afternoon just west of Jerusalem. Fire and rescue authorities saying that the fire is closing in on homes in Abu Ghosh and Yad HaShmona as forces work tirelessly to contain the spread of the flames. At least 29 teams of firefighters and 10 planes joining in on the efforts. Simultaneously, residents of the Judean Hills Kibbutz Ma'aleh HaChamisha being evacuated, while nearby roads, highways like Route 1 and train services between Jerusalem and Ben Gurion Airport all closed until further notice. The good news is that hopefully sooner rather than later, fire services spokespersons are saying that the blaze is beginning to come under control. Satellite images captured last year appearing to prove Iranian attempts to conceal its nuclear weapons program. The pictures, taken over several years' time, revealing a site in Sanjarin, Iran, where a nuclear research building and manufacturing plant had been covered up. The plant allegedly used to produce shockwave generators, key components in the miniaturization and detonation of nuclear arms. Meanwhile, Iranian and Western powers continuing nuclear deal negotiations in Vienna, but U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that in light of Iran's malign activities, some form of sanctions will likely remain in place even after a potential agreement is reached.
We don't know at this stage whether Iran is willing and able to do what it would need to do to come back into compliance. So we'll see if that actually materializes. Even in the event of a return to compliance with the JCPOA, hundreds of sanctions would remain in place, including sanctions imposed by the Trump administration. If they are not inconsistent with the JCPOA, they will remain unless and until Iran's behavior changes.
Joining me now with more is international relations expert at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategic Studies and former head of the Foreign Relations Directorate to the National Security Council in the Prime Minister's office, Miki Aronson. Miki, thanks so much for being with us again. Now, what sanctions is Blinken talking about? How strong are the sanctions that will likely remain even with the newly signed JCPOA?
Well, it is obvious that the majority of sanctions, the significant sanctions, would be removed if all parties agree to return to the JCPOA. It would be quite insignificant, and when the U.S. is talking about reaching a longer and stronger agreement afterwards, it is quite unclear what are the leverages it would have to do so. The majority of sanctions would not be binding ones.
So when we say that there are hundreds of sanctions, are we talking about hundreds of small, weak sanctions?
There would be sanctions also that were enacted under the Trump administration, but the Iranians would reach the position they're interested in, which is opening their economy, being able to trade, and still being able to continue with their nuclear program. Also, Secretary Blinken said on Monday that the problem that if the Iranians continue to breach the agreement, the breakout time would shrink to weeks. But the problem is that under the JCPOA, breakout time is allowed to shrink to weeks starting from 2023, when the sunset clauses begin to apply. So from 2023 till 2030, it would be legal to enrich uranium, to use advanced centrifuges. And this is exactly why Israel opposed the agreement, because the JCPOA does not solve the question of Iranian nuclear weapons. It only postpones it.
So let's move now to internal Iran. How are Iranian officials, especially presidential candidates ahead of Iran's elections, discussing the sanctions and the JCPOA nuclear deal?
Well, we know that elections are coming. We see that the majority, if not all, candidates are what is considered to be non-moderate ones. Not that I think there are really moderate ones, because the person who decides who will run is the council and the supreme leaders. So to begin with, it's not a question of election, it's a question of selection. And they will all do their best to remove the sanctions as agreed, and it seems to be a done deal. the JCPOA, returning to the JCPOA seems to be a done deal.
All right, so we're seeing reports now that since the United States is seemingly dead set on returning to a deal, as you're saying as well, Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are returning to talks with Iran of their own. What do you know of these reports and these alleged discussions? And also, do you see a peaceful resolution to the conflicts with Iran taking shape? Or do you think that maybe some of these efforts are just futile with respect to the mullahs and the Ayatollah regime in Tehran?
Well, everybody's trying to hedge their bets. And Gulf states are noticing the American fatigue from the Middle East. They're noticing the fact that the U.S. is interested in focusing elsewhere in its internal problems in Asia, and they're trying to hedge their bets. The Gulf states are not interested in appearing as a serious opposition to the U.S. They are interested in appearing as promoting U.S. interests, which is stabilizing the Middle East and reaching some sort of a stabilization between Sunni nations. There isn't really a Sunni axis, and the Shia axis, and that would promote what they perceive as promote American interests. But there's also difference in the Gulf itself. The UAE agreed to what is called the Gulf Standard, which is not pursuing a nuclear fuel cycle. Saudi Arabia did not agree to that. And everybody's saying, justly so, why not have the same capacities that Iran has that did not agree, of course, to anything like the gold standard.
So it sounds like a policy if Iran has it, then why can't we? Which I think goes against the non-proliferation agreements. But in the meantime, I'm sorry to cut you off, but thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insights with us, Mickey Aronson.
Thank you.
Israel on Wednesday received the second of 4 new state-of-the-art German-made warships, one of the most advanced corvettes, and aptly named Oz, which in Hebrew means courage. After sailing for 2 weeks, the Sal 6 corvette warship docked in the Haifa port in a ceremonial flotilla accompanied by 2 submarines. It was welcomed by Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz, the commander of the Israeli Navy, as well as dozens of naval officers. The warship is the second to arrive in Israel, the first docking last December, and the additional 2 are set to arrive later this year. This will bring the total number of missile-carrying ships in Israel in the Israeli Navy to 15, with the new arrivals spearheading Israel's maritime endeavors. As such, these high-tech vessels aim to ensure that Israel bolsters its presence at sea, among other missions to protect the offshore natural gas fields near Lebanon and conduct missions in the Red Sea and the Gulf. And moving on, the U.S.-Israel relationship has seen its fair share of ups and downs over the years, but it is no doubt one of the strongest and most important relationships for Israel. And with the new coalition set to be sworn in on Sunday, this raises the question of how this government change will affect Jerusalem's relationship with Washington. Here to discuss is retired Ambassador Dani Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Welcome. So I'd like to start with the general question that's, I think, on everyone's mind, and then sort of maybe dive into the specifics. But generally speaking, how will the swearing in of the new coalition affect Israel's relationship with the United States and the Biden administration specifically?
Well, I'm not sure that it will have such a great deal of an effect, certainly because there are interests which are constant both for Israel and the United States. Of course, there are many nuances. Of course, there are many directions. But the main thing is that the Biden administration is trying to keep an arm's length from the Middle East, also from the conflict with the Palestinians. And this will not change with the new government simply because the new government is not going to have any focus on the Palestinian issue. It's a government which will have decided to not deal with controversial issues for them. And that includes maybe first and foremost the Palestinian issue. Something that could have some effect is an issue of settlements. But here again, I believe that the status quo will be as such that the policy of intensifying or strengthening the settlements in the major Jewish blocs will continue, but no new settlements. And in such a policy, the Biden administration can tolerate. Jerusalem also may be an issue, but I don't think that Biden is Obama in the sense that here there is a little bit of leeway for the government when it comes to this. And I think that certainly in the next few months, the focus of, let's say, the discussion with Washington will be mostly on Iran, less so on the Palestinians.
So speaking about Iran, I mean, this really is one of the major issues facing the new coalition, right? The U.S. is restarting talks this weekend with Iran. It's been a major point of contention with the Netanyahu administration. What can we expect now with the new coalition?
Well, the position of this government, and certainly of the prime minister here, the two prime ministers, I would say, is not much different than Netanyahu. The strategy would be the same. However, in the tactical issues, there may be a difference which may benefit the relationship. Certainly, there will not be any defiance, which will be a public defiance. It may be an intensification of backdoor meetings. And I think that in case there won't be any agreement between the two governments, they will agree to disagree, as has been the case so many times in the past in relation to the Palestinian issue. But here, I believe that there will be a appropriate compensation, let's say, file or a compensation measures that the Biden administration will commit to Israel in such a case.
Right, Ambassador Daniel Ayalon, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
My pleasure.